KPMG presents The Blueprint, Business in the New Normal.
Hello and welcome to KPMG Presents Business in the New Normal, where we are gathered here to tell the ESG story from strategy to reporting, all part of the KPMG Conclave 2023, where the theme is thought, action and impact. And we have a great selection of business leaders, of leaders from the investment community, and of course leaders from the enablement aspect gathered here to share their insights on the topic. Kalpana Morparia and V.S. Parthasarathy. Dr. V.S. Parthasarathy join us to share their business leaders' perspective considering the years worth of experience that they have. Amit Tandal and Rama Patel are here to give us the investment community's perspective, and Sai Venkateshwaran, as partner of KPMG, you provide us the solutions perspective for this discussion. So let's begin with the broad strokes. Kalpana, I'll start with you and get Dr. Partha's perspective. Is sustainability now moving from a nice to have to a must have agenda in the boardroom? Tell us about what's the thinking now in the boardrooms, especially when we look at sustainability and its importance as a long-term value creation driver.
First of all, I want to compliment KPMG for organizing this conclave. It is one of the pioneers in terms of recognizing sustainability. And you're so right, sustainability from a nice to have has moved center stage. It's taken quite a while to get there, but I would say it's absolutely core now. And every board discussion absolutely focuses on this across all of the three dimensions: environment, social impact, and governance.
All right, Partha, your thoughts, especially on when we look at sustainability for value creation, long-term value creation, what are the discussions happening in the boardroom?
So one of the first things I just wanted to have and add a little bit of controversy to
Always welcome.
What Kalpana said. Yes, it's a must-have. It's center stage, but still we have not moved on from integrated reporting to integrated operations. We still are very much kind of saying what's trying to happen in bits and pieces. And if I can quote the Hindi couplet, it's thoda hai aur bahut ki zarurat hai. So it's in that stage.
So where is the shortcoming?
Yeah. So I'll just kind of build the thought and then come and answer that question as well. The second thing is our bane in the boardroom is triple bottom line. Because we say triple bottom line, we have created a controversy for ourselves. When you put people and planet along with profit, guess who wins? Yeah, the profit always wins because that's more fungible, right? That's more visible. And people and planet are there. So unless we move away from this concept of 2P plus 2P, as I call it, people and planet as end, and process of profit and process of governance as the other two which comes in, we will have to see. And those are the kind of changes that we need. So to answer your question, yeah, lots of good things are being done. It's now a board point agenda, but we have taken baby steps where giant leaps are still the order of the day.
Absolutely. And we'll explore as to whether times are a changing, to quote Dylan, especially when it comes to people, planet, and profit, whether profit is still seen in isolation or whether the other two are playing an increasingly greater role to generate profits. But speaking of profits, let's also look at what is the investor community's interest, especially when it comes to ESG issues. And do they really believe that a company which actually looks at ESG seriously is a great investment prospect in the long term? So Amit, maybe we'll start with you, and Rama, we'll get your perspective on that later.
As far as investors are concerned, there's a very clear realization that ESG impacts each of the industries differently. That is there. And therefore, the big challenge for them is that, look, there's a huge amount of data out there. How do you get the comparability? But I can come back to this a little bit later. But coming back to the fact that even when you recognize that ESG is impacting each of the industries differently, there are certain themes which kind of run through the entire process. One is there is a recognition by investors that the risk adjusted return for companies which are following ESG processes are going to be a little better than those who've kind of given short shrift to sustainability and stewardship. The second factor is that the systemic risk is lower. And by that I mean that the volatility in terms of performance, and therefore in terms of the stock performance is significantly lower. So investors, to sum up, investors realize both systemic risk and tail risk is lower for companies which kind of adhere to strong ESG principles. Can I draw a one-to-one correlation that those who have very strong practices will have the highest returns? I don't think we can clearly do that.
Maybe Rama could share more details on that, because from a risk perspective, I understand what Amit is saying, that ideally there's lesser systemic risk. But when we look at performance, whether we look at value creation, talent retention, or just broad company matrices, do you think ESG preference is going to play a stronger role for companies?
So there are a lot of studies which have been done in terms of, what is the long-term sustainable return generation capabilities of ESG conscious companies compared to the other counterparts. Empirically, on a long-term basis, there are studies which show that, eventually the performance of ESG conscious companies have outpaced that of the peers. Let's understand the concept of ESG. It's not something which is new. Yes, the acronym is new, the focus is new. I'm sure we all will appreciate the global events which we have seen over the last couple of years, starting from the pandemic to the geopolitical issues to war, and the kind of, a very small example, the kind of supply side disruptions which things have created. And for real, companies, investors have seen how, it has impacted business performance, etc. So it would not be a far-reaching statement to say that very clearly sustainable practices is something which would gather focus in terms of what even companies are looking at, like what we had our two speakers mentioning about the focus, as well as investors also driving this agenda. And that is how we are seeing even the ESG focused funds, the money which is chasing ESG focused companies, the way it is really growing. And I think it is going to continue gathering pace.
All right. Hopefully, we've just scratched the surface and there are better times, much better times ahead. All right. Sai, let me get you in on the conversation to respond to what Kalpana, Partha, Amit, and Rama have stated, and also to get your view on, the fact that the landscape, the reporting landscape is still seen as very fragmented. So how should companies clearly articulate the key ESG work that they are doing? Because a company can have multiple locations. They are wondering how exactly to focus on when it comes to reporting, what exactly to share. How do they clear the doubts? How do they clear the path and move ahead, marching on together with their enterprise?
Yeah. No, thanks, Gautam, for that question. So, again, like Kalpana and others mentioned, I think ESG reporting has also kind of moved to center stage. It's no more a nice to have. I think companies are kind of embracing it. And of course, there has been a regulatory push. There is the regulatory reporting that's coming in, but that's only addressing one little part of it. I think there is a lot that at least the more progressive companies are doing in terms of adopting the kind of global frameworks and kind of looking at what is relevant in their context to kind of communicate to their investors, etc. I mean, I think you are seeing that kind of a trend towards adopting many of the other global standards, and together with that also kind of getting assurance done. But I think one key element which I still see missing in the Indian context, we still haven't got to an integrated view in terms of what is the impact of, let's say, climate change or some of the social change, and what does it actually do to your financial performance, both in the short and kind of medium term. Just this morning, I was reading an article where I think one of the key questions that is being raised is, will there be very, very large balance sheets, which in a net zero world are completely useless? And the question is, at what stage do you essentially start communicating that story? How do you start kind of getting investors to appreciate some of the hits that you might have to take so that you remain relevant in the longer term?
All right. To take it forward to what Sai said, and Partha, let me get you in on this discussion, because as you referred to earlier of people, planet, and profit, and to take forward what Sai mentioned, limited knowledge of ESG issues, that's seen as a big challenge. And when we look at companies, they still see ESG sort of as an ancillary rather than a core part of the business function. And for that, it's cited that limited knowledge and expertise on ESG issues is the key reason. According to you, how can this challenge be addressed?
Yeah, I think it's the biggest boon that we have is limited knowledge.
How so?
Yeah, the reason being that if you have half knowledge, adri gagri chalkat jai, so you will be trying to do all these things half-baked and not gain. The best thing is because you are coming with no preconceived notion, you can start afresh and get the right kind of people in the room. not just because it's a KPMG ESG conference. In Car Dekho, it's similar kind of journey. And all the companies I'm seeing, and this is, then we can get the right kind of expert, because the industry also makes a huge difference, what we need to bring in. So if we try to bring all the expertise inside, we will fail. So if I were to kind of do, how do we do and cascade this? That probably is a very important question. First is the mental creation. What we are doing now is first the physical creation and then trying to fit the bill in. And I think, as Sai said, maybe the first thing is for the board to set the broader agenda of saying, like Mahindra once said, that I want to be 10 years ahead of the global climate, targets, and we want to achieve that. So what is that you want to achieve in a more meaningful way? And that's what you want to set as an agenda. That's the first thing, the mental creation. The second one is we start to ask the right questions in the organization. We ask, I was in Xerox and we were not getting profitability. And somebody asked the question, why are we not getting profitability? So the consultant who had come all the way from UK asked them that, what do you target the salesman? He said, we target volume and market share. So, and then he turned back and said, then how will you get profitability? I think it's still the same thing. We are asking everyone QCD. You put a project, what do you ask? What is the cost? What is the quality? What is the delivery? Do you ask what is QCDS? What is quality, cost, delivery, and sustainability? So just change the question that you ask both at the boardroom and at the operating level. That's the single biggest change you want to bring. Third is bring a leader. Don't, sometimes you can afford, big groups can afford a single term. Like, for example, in Car Dekho, it's made the CFO as the big leader. In another place, CEO is being made as the big leader. So, but these people can then start driving the change. And fourth is set targets across all groups, and no function, no department should be left out. Everyone has something to do for ESG, because it's not somebody's game. It's everybody's game, unless we will not achieve. So that's the...
All right, a 4-step process, as Partha explains. And Kalpana, maybe you can get your thoughts on that for companies that are ready to sort of integrate ESG into their core businesses. How do they start their sustainability journey on the right note? We had a 4-step process being outlined by Partha. What are your thoughts on that?
So clearly, I think the larger companies, the companies that are much more focused on overall stakeholder returns, started this journey some years ago. And there the focus is really, as Partha explained, at the board level, looking at broad goals that the company is going to achieve. Governance across sectors will be pretty common. And it's, as Amit said, we can't brush everyone with the same. Environmental factors will be very different. Social factors could be different as well, other than the people and diversity and inclusion. So I think the regulators' requirement in terms of integrated reporting, now BRSR, etc., is one initiative, but there is a lot more that needs to be done. I feel in the ultimate analysis, if we can get the international auditing community, as you know, there are some efforts on there, to really have a standardized approach towards reporting, that will go a long way in terms of comparing across various sectors and across geographies.
Absolutely. That is the key need of the hour, so that everyone is clear on the ground rules. Sai, your thoughts on the points which have been raised by Partha and Kalpana on companies starting their sustainability journey on the right note. What needs to be done?
Yeah. So 2 or 3 things that I would kind of highlight. So first is, I think, starting to bring convergence and alignment between strategy and reporting. So there are some companies that are probably a lot more evolved, let's say on the strategy side. They've kind of set a net zero target. They have kind of started baselining their using SBTI or other initiatives and so on. And then they're starting to actually monitor and actually make progress. But they're probably not doing enough on the reporting side or communicating their story. There are many others who have actually gone about doing a great job on reporting, but still just doing stuff on the peripheral side, not really attacking the core of the business or what needs to change in the business strategy. So I think there needs to be that alignment and convergence between bringing both to a level of maturity that is acceptable. So I think that's clearly one thing that's required. The second is, because ESG is kind of evolving the way it is, and so if you look at organizations maybe 3-4 years back, it was resting in the hands of a chief sustainability officer who was somebody relatively lower down in the rank, right? And while, of course, now it's become a boardroom agenda, but still, with many organizations, it's not clear as to who has the ultimate responsibility for driving this. Of course, this needs to be embedded in every part of the organization, but having that kind of responsibility kind of clearly laid out and accountability kind of established, I think that's the second important thing. And the third is, I think, the effective communication to the market very early on, because a lot of times when you're making this transition, the transition essentially means making additional investments, etc., but you're not going to increase your capacity, etc. So it's more dollars essentially to kind of just continue producing the same level of assets or kind of services or products. So in the short term, this will of course have a hit on EPS or on your IRR, etc. But I think in the longer term, that does create value. So I think getting the market to really appreciate the short-term pains for long-term value creation and that whole communication, I think, is a story that I think organizations need to clearly work on.
All right, to pick on one conversation thread there, which is effectively cascading ESG-related practices across the organization. Partha, you had mentioned that, but easier said than done, because there will be challenges. There are still a lot of silos between the financial and ESG reporting sides. How can that be addressed? Your view, and then Rama, I'll come to you for your views on that.
Yeah, very quickly, I think there will be difference. The key thing is, in HR term, they say that without storming, there'll be no norming, and without norming, there'll be no performing. I suggest that we first have that storming out in the open, and I think that's a very healthy step one. So if there is no, it's more reporting and financial reporting, and the other reporting doesn't talk. But the moment you start talking about integrated reporting, and just say the management or the director reports encompasses all. You have to come together to do, and they will debate who did what or who didn't do. But that's a good, healthy debate to have, because that storming is important. The second one is that it is important for all of them to align to something very common, very clear. Okay. Just give an example is that when we buy tickets, airline tickets, now we know how many carbon footprint that gives, right? But do we actually use that to make decisions? I think this is the second step in the process. So as the organization starts to use that to make decisions, then we are going into the next step. So I wouldn't be bothered that there are silos. I would be bothered if there is no storming.
That's an interesting viewpoint. Rama, your comments on that?
Yes, I agree completely with Sai and Sir that, the steps are in the right direction, and it's going to be a continuum. Interestingly, and we are excited about the fact that there is going to be new ESG data coming on board with, ma'am mentioned about the BRSR, with a lot of new disclosures coming in from this year onwards. So then also needs to be another angle of synthesizing all this data into actionable insights, right? I mean, you spoke about how investor community is looking at it. And like everything is quite interconnected. So looking at this data, making sense of it, doing good benchmarking exercise to bring out, a third party, an independent opinion on how the performance is with respect to ESG, benchmarking it across relevant peers or best-in-class performance, which will also nudge corporates to move the needle, to move the standards up, and also help investors probably sieve through, this the data which is going to all come in terms of picking up the investee companies they are looking at from an ESG lens. So I think clearly there are actionables in each pocket where it looks like transparency from an issuer's perspective, from an service provider like that of, say, a rating agency, to look at some of this data and come out with ESG ratings, and investors to look at it to make decisions based out of that.
All right. In the second leg of the conversation, I want to drive the focus more towards risk. And Amit, I'll come to you as you had spoken about it. How can companies approach ESG reporting and performance in a sort of a holistic manner so as to understand the accompanying risks in a more robust manner and cash in on, say, the capital raising opportunities brought about by various ESG topics when they look to sort of converge strategy and reporting? Your thoughts on this?
Look, I think I'll kind of take up from what Sai had said, which is as of now, when people talk about ESG, they kind of think about it as a disclosure. And that's the big challenge. They have to actually convert it into saying that, look, this is what it is. This is what we need to report on. But therefore, if we need to report on this, what does it mean as far as my strategy is concerned? The second aspect of that is that, look, if there is some of these things are seen as threats, how is it that companies are going to convert these into opportunities? Now, if they're clear about one is what is it that they report and how is it that they report, and linked to that is how is it that they're measuring, and the second is they kind of are able to convert this into some meaningful strategy for themselves, then it becomes very clear there's a lot of money which is chasing ESG related themes or sustainability related themes today. So then they have to decide that, look, if this is it, how do we capitalize on that opportunity? And I'm not talking about ticking the box, because if you're ticking the box, it's kind of very easy to kind of figure out that, look, these persons are not serious. And therefore, if you kind of think about it, when SEBI very recently has said they want some degree of assurance, that comes into play. It becomes important because now you've kind of moved away from, putting a picture of a tree or raindrops or something in your annual report. You have to kind of measure the data. And if you're measuring the data, hopefully you will have much, much more robust systems and processes at the back end so that you're able to capture the data and start to report it. I'll kind of, just a little bit of a digression, and this is actually, to my mind, quite interesting. What SEBI has done about, I think it was the board meeting was last week, I think, where they've asked for assurance. And that becomes important because if you look at it in the global context, everyone, by everyone, I mean the European regulators, when they've spoken about the SFDR, they've focused on what is the data you're reporting and why is it meaningful? And also in terms of, how do you prevent greenwashing? SEC is also kind of doing the same. What SEBI has done is it's actually completed the circle by saying, look, we want some degree of assurance. So while there is a lot of skepticism that, look, there is assurance, I think it's a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. As things move from voluntary to mandatory, I'm sure a lot of interesting dynamics will also come into play. And I'll get Kalpana's response on that. But before that, Sai, your response to this question of a holistic approach to ESG reporting, where you get a complete picture of accompanying risks, and that in turn improves capital raising opportunities. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah. No, I think it's very important for companies to have that holistic approach towards this, looking at both the risks and the opportunities. And especially when you look at the risks, there are, again, specific elements in terms of, I think, the impact on earnings and impact on your balance sheet and so on. And in some sense, even potentially moving away from your current business model and so on. But at the same time, I think to kind of fund those investments extra, there are many opportunities that open up, including because, again, if you look at it from a global perspective, this ESG transition can't be funded only by private capital. There will be a lot of government capital that will come. Again, there will be developed nations that probably start funding the developing nations and so on. So there are several pools of capital that are going to be available to address part of this transition. So it's about the company starting to look at what are those opportunities as well, which are available to help make that transition, rather than be in denial about the need to make that change. So if it is about, let's say, adopting some new carbon capture technologies in your production process, how do I make that investment? How do I kind of look at incentives that are available to fund that those investments and so on, and start taking that holistic view. And once you start connecting these dots and look at the picture starts to look very different. The economics then start to look very different as compared to if you just looked at the risks in isolation and so on. So I think that's clearly the way for companies to start thinking of this.
All right. Kalpana, let me quickly come to you for your views on the key priority areas for standardization to improve in ESG reporting, because lots of things are happening. BRSR, it's gone from voluntary to mandatory. Globally, regulators seem to be more in sync around it. So what are the key priority areas for corporates according to you?
Sure. So I thought let's just put a little perspective in this. In the case of ESG reporting, I think we seem to have put the cart before the horse. So when a company wants to start a business, you're focusing on what your business is, what your strategy is, how you're going to execute it. You run your business and then you report it, right? Here we are saying, here is the ESG reporting that's required. Now let's go figure out, therefore, what is it we should be doing on the E aspect, the S aspect, and what we are already doing on the governance aspect. So I think it's very important now for companies to think that if I want my company to be there for the next hundreds of years, environment and climate is going to be a key part of it. What am I doing? And then, of course, fit it to what the mandatory reporting requirements are. Similarly, on social, social, we tend to focus on employees and inclusion and diversity. It's much more than that. It's the impact on the society. And if you allow me 2 minutes, I do want to talk about some of the sectors, which are challenging sectors. Let's take power, right? India currently needs to rely on thermal power. But what is it that these large companies are doing in terms of their journey to move away eventually to alternate energy? Very key, that's what we need, whether mandated or not. That's what the companies from a strategic perspective should think about. Take banks. Their own environment footprint might be relatively lesser compared to all of the other industries. But no bank today in India is talking about financed emissions. Forget facilitated emissions. And I think it's high time that we really bring the right priorities here, is to say, for overall sustainability, what do I need to do with my current business models, and then actually set forth the strategic direction.
All right, an emphatic call to action from a business leader with years worth of experience. Rama, your thoughts on this key priority areas for standardization when it comes to ESG reporting?
Yes, like co-speakers have mentioned, I think the standardization of reporting really helps in terms of comparison, and also to make a point of what Sai mentioned, that it opens up a lot of funding avenues. The pools of capital which are available, I think, which will help. I mean, the doors would be open in terms of tapping some of those, and we also just heard about, if, the banks or the financial institutions start looking at some of these very closely, I think then there is no looking back in terms of, what the standardization of disclosures could mean. Because ultimately, both investors or lenders will have to look at it and make the decisions in terms of where to fund, where to invest. So I think this is a step in the right direction in terms of, organizing this whole ecosystem in terms of funding as well as investing.
All right, before we wrap things up, a quick view from Sai on how is the external assurance landscape shaping up? And from a third-party assurance perspective, what role do you see them playing in building trust in the system, considering there can be greenwashing criticisms, as Amit mentioned earlier? Your thoughts on this?
No, I think it's going to play a big role in terms of, I think, enhancing the level of confidence from investors and other users of this information, because so far it's been all voluntary reporting in the Indian context, while many companies have adopted even assurance practice, but it's on select metrics that they've gone and sought assurance, not on the entire kind of ESG report and so on. And most companies have also kind of so far embarked only on a limited assurance, which is a high-level review as compared to an audit-type assurance. But what SEBI is currently mandated through the BRSR change recently is reasonable assurance, which is an audit-like assurance. And I think that's actually a fairly rigorous standard that SEBI is kind of set. And I think if you look at the consultation paper, I think one of the key risks that they're trying to address is actually the concern on greenwashing, and which is why they've asked for this. But I think companies need to use this next 12-month window that they have to get their level of readiness to go through that assurance. And I think starting with maybe just the FY23 data, they need to go through a readiness for assurance kind of an exercise, just to see where is it that their data, systems, process, technology, etc. is lacking, and where do they need to build that rigor so that next year when assurance becomes mandatory, I think they're able to kind of withstand that assurance and essentially demonstrate to the world that what they're reporting is kind of robust and good.
All right, Amit, any views to share there on the external assurance landscape? How do you see that shaping up right now?
Look, I think it's a first step, and therefore the challenge is, to my mind, do you have an ecosystem out there, or do you have enough players out there who would be able to provide the right kind of assurance? It's we know we have KPMG and the other firms, but do they have the capacity there? And therefore, how do you capacity build at this time so that the large companies, small companies, we began with about 125, but before you know it, it will spread to 1,000 and then 2,000 companies. So we need the infrastructure. we need the capabilities, and therefore the focus over the next 12 to 24 months needs to be on capacity building.
All right. Before we leave, a quick message from the panel, a key summary, a key point from this conversation that viewers should take away. Kalpana, your thoughts?
So we've begun the journey, and I'm glad in some ways our regulators forcing the mandatory disclosures. I think India can actually set a benchmark, certainly for the emerging markets on this journey, and I'm sure the Indian corporates will be up to it.
All right. Partha?
I think while we have started very good start, think about integrated operation versus reporting. Think about QCDS and not just QCD. Think about mental creation, and most of all, important triple bottom line. Instead, think about 2P plus 2P. Thank you.
All right, Ron?
I think there are right steps, the first steps across all pockets, and looking forward how all this would come together. I think transparency would hold the key in the right spirit for all of this to come together, and India shining in terms of at least the emerging market in terms of what we can transpire or inspire people with respect to ESG.
All right, Amit?
I think we all need to move away from a mindset that what companies and we are being asked to do is something which is regulatory. What we need to realize is that climate change is a very real issue. It's a very real challenge which is confronting us, and therefore all companies, whether they're large, small, domestic, international, need to say that, look, this is a problem which I am facing, and therefore what is it that I can do to make the to make sure that the planet which our children inherit is much greener than what we had inherited in our life.
All right, the last word from you, Sai.
Yeah, I would just say two things, and which I touched on earlier. So one is, I think it's important for companies to take that holistic view between strategy and reporting, and I think the sooner they do it, the better. Second is, I think, to have that integrated view between financial reporting and non-financial reporting, to take an integrated view towards how they kind of communicate. And last is start sooner than later, because it's a long journey.
All right, on that note, it's time to wrap up our conversation here on KPMG Presents the Blueprint Business in the New Normal, where leaders are gathered here to tell the ESG story from strategy to reporting as part of the KPMG Conclave 2023, where the theme is thought, action and impact. I'd like to thank all the panelists for giving us their time and sharing their valuable inputs on this topic. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Till next time, this is your host, Gautam Srinivasan, signing off. Have a great day.
KPMG presents The Blueprint, Business in the New Normal.